So both of these traditions, they, for instance, never stop invoking Plato and Aristotle. Even though, as we know, some of you may know, the texts of Plato and Aristotle are, there are many texts that we do not know if it's properly attributed or not. There are hundreds of interpretations. Many of the interpretations made by contemporary thinkers seem to completely diverge away from the way Plato and Aristotle were traditionally read in commentaries on them for almost a millennium up till the modern world. But that seems to be a perfectly legitimate philosophical project. You see what I mean? Nobody says, oh, you are bringing something from outside of history to bear on something modern, or something very pre-modern. Here I'm not even talking about pre-modern, I'm talking about ancient philosophy, antiquity. Okay? And again, one of the other puzzling things, of course, is that Islamic philosophy continued. It didn't stop. It didn't die with Averroes. It continued, as some people may have said, it continued in philosophical theologies. There has recently been some scholarship on that. And luckily, it continued in the tradition of Hawashi on the logical works and on the Kalam works, and it was very vibrant and alive up till the 18th century. And people were even reading the emerging European thinkers at that time, many of them. So that's one part of it. Another part of it, so this is one motivation for the project, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. And then one other motivation that is, I think, also very important was the status of contemporary humanities and its relationship to rationality. And that's a huge issue that we are facing right now, particularly in the postmodern moment. And one of these aspects, which would be a nice introduction to the topic of this talk, is the relationship between reason and its universal claims. Again, in very simple terms, why do we always associate reason with universality? Because, as Hegel said, to quote Hegel, and before him Aristotle 2,000 years before, reason only thinks the universals. So when you sense a particular thing. For instance, I can sense this board and that board. This is a black board and this is a white board, correct? I can say the difference between them based on their material, okay, sensible characteristics. Okay, but my reason subsumes both of them under a universal concept, which is board. So the reason always thinks the universal concept, materiality differentiates. Okay? So, in what way that is related to humanities? Well, a huge deal. Okay? I'm in the first lecture, and I would like to refer you to it, even though I think it's the recording of it didn't go well. But the handout is there, so I think Khaled can send it to anyone, and the institute can send it to anyone. I talked about two thinkers who talked about the birth of contemporary human sciences, because human sciences are relatively new phenomena. Psychology, history, all of these are relatively new phenomena from the late 19th century onwards. Before that, you would do either moral philosophy, which included political science and economics. So Adam Smith, for instance, when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he conceived of his work as part of moral philosophy. Okay? And so did Isaac Newton, a century before, when he wrote the Principia Mathematica. Okay? He said that this is a contribution to natural philosophy. Okay? So two great thinkers. One of them is the first one to actually coin the term Geisteswissenschaften in the German tradition, namely Wilhelm Delta, talked about how we should differentiate between Erklärung, explanation, which is the principle that we use in analyzing natural physical phenomena, and interpretation. And interpretation is his term for the method that should be used to approach human phenomena. And human phenomena, to make a very long story short for Delphi, and he took that from the great father of German Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant, has to deal with two fundamental aspects of our human experience. What are these? Our moral commitments, which are usually universal and completely conceptual, like the concept of honesty, justice, all of these things, okay? They have to be purely rational in order to apply for everyone, correct? Okay. They cannot allow for material differentiation. Otherwise, you cannot have justice in a society, correct? If it is relative to everyone, okay? You know, I want justice yellow, you want justice blue, then we go fight, okay? But in order, so morality has to be universal. And then there is the historical, physical context of phenomena that is in a constant flux of change, okay? And the human sciences, to make a long story short, and I'm here making myself susceptible to attacks by all of my friends who are Delphi scholars, but because I'm reducing Delphi very much, but he took that idea from Kant and he developed it brilliantly. Another great thinker who is used extensively nowadays in Foucault, in human sciences, I already told you his name, and I would say that he is he's not used in a very rigorous philosophical way, is Foucault, the man I said. But probably any one of you who is an undergraduate in any field of the human sciences or a graduate, Foucault must have popped up in your face in some course one way or another, okay? Particularly with the idea of discourse analysis and all of that stuff. Now Foucault, in one of his major works, if not the major work, Les Mots et les Choses, okay, The Order of Things, in the last huge chapter of the work called Man and His Doubles, he talks about the emergence of the modern episteme and the birth of the modern human, the concept of the modern human. And he says that that birth was a very troubled birth. Why was it troubled, Monsieur Foucault? Okay, we talked about Herr Delphi, now we are talking about Monsieur Foucault. Why is it troubled? Precisely for the same reasons that Delphi, but of course he elaborated on it in a far more complex, nuanced way, Foucault. He said that the human in the 18th century, and again the reference whether directly or indirectly is to Kant, became the foundation of all of the categories of understanding the world. Because this is what Kant says. Kant says that we understand the world, okay, based on certain categories that shape our consciousness and our knowledge in a very general way. Okay? So we define the basis on which we can have knowledge on the world, the categories of our consciousness. Okay? This is why he said we never know the essences. We should give up on that old project of knowing the truth in itself. We should restrict our knowledge only to phenomena. Okay, and then he said, but we can know something in itself, in an essential way. What is that thing? Our morality, our moral maxims. Okay? And Foucault brilliantly pointed out a very interesting dilemma. That because the human is both transcendent, and I can also make myself an object, and if you look at all of the human sciences, they objectify us. Psychology objectifies you in a particular way. Economics objectify you in a particular way as a consuming agent. Political science and its empirical attitude objectifies you in a particular way. Every science has a system of using the categories of causality and quantity and so on and so forth to objectify human phenomena in a particular way. Okay? Is it getting complicated? I hope so, because it is. Okay? So on one hand, we are the basis of the categories. On the other hand, we are also objects for analysis by these categories. And that's a paradox, because you cannot be the subject and object at the same time. Okay? And Foucault brilliantly says that as the positive sciences were developing, that question was completely pushed aside. That fundamental root question. So why do I think it's important, and why I think it's important to bring it back? I thought it was important because simply we are living now in a crisis.